Today I'm in Disneyland doing something a little bit different. I'm here with my main camera, like I always am, but I am also here today to test that camera against my newest phone, my iPhone. I've always kind of talked trash about phones as cameras in theme parks. I see everybody using them, but for the kind of photography that I do, they just really don't work, especially on the dark rides, the fast rides, the stuff where everything's moving really fast. There's not a lot of light. They usually get really grainy. You get a lot of motion blur, and they just don't make very good images. But I've heard a lot of talk about how good the camera is on these newest iPhones. So now that I have one, I figured I'd come here and test it out and see how it does. My plan is to shoot a bunch of different things here in the park, a bunch of different types of subjects. I'm going to shoot them with the iPhone, and then I'm going to shoot the same subjects with my usual camera, my EM1X, and see how they compare. I expect the EM1X to come out on top because it's got a bigger sensor. I have lenses with faster apertures. You actually have manual control over what the camera is doing. So I don't expect this to be a very fair fight, but I think there are some things the iPhone's going to do that will be very acceptable, and I kind of want to learn what it can do and what it can't, so I know when I can bring it and when I need to bring a real camera. And the first place I'm heading this morning is to the Haunted Mansion for the Nightmare Before Christmas holiday overlay. I want to do this early in the morning before the line gets too long. So with this ride, even though it's a dark ride, the ride vehicle moves very slowly, and there is a lot of contrast. The subjects are lit very well. There's a lot of black light, a lot of glow paint. So the camera should have a decent time actually focusing, but I think we're gonna see what the camera decides to do. Is gonna go to a high ISO and a low shutter speed. And the combination of those two things usually is a death sentence for a small sensor camera like this. So let's hop on and see what happens.
In this endless hallway scene, it's a relatively dark scene, and so we see that the iPhone had to jack its ISO all the way up to 10,000, and then it still needed 1/15 of a second of shutter speed in order to get enough light to expose this image. Whereas the EM1X, I got a faster shutter speed and a lower ISO. The next scene as we head through the attic, one of my other favorite subjects is this Hatbox Ghost. Let's see how the iPhone does in this situation. Will it give me the same settings? Yeah, it jacked the ISO up to 12,500. It kept that 1/15 of a second shutter speed. And this long of an exposure tends to bring in a lot more of the background than the EM1X. This scene was going to be tricky because Jack's hand is moving relatively quickly back and forth, and so you can see on the left with the iPhone, the slow shutter speed caused his hand to blur, whereas again on the EM1X, I had a faster shutter speed so I could freeze some motion. In this last scene with Oogie Boogie, this is a relatively slow scene. You pass by it really slowly. He's not moving very much. I got a little longer shutter speed because there's a little more light. My ISO is a little lower. That's a really clean image. Overall, for first impressions, I think the iPhone did relatively well for a dark ride.
Let's kick things up another notch, and let's go over to the second darkest, second fastest ride in the park, and that is the Indiana Jones adventure. I think this is going to be a much more challenging attraction because the ride vehicle moves so fast. There are not a lot of places you can get away with a speed that slow on Indiana Jones, so this might be hilarious.
This first part of the ride is the only part of the ride where you're actually moving slowly and in a straight line. So you have something really cool to shoot here when you see the statue of Mara that changes colors. The iPhone did a pretty decent job here. Still have that same high ISO, we still have that same slow shutter speed, but because we're moving slowly, the image comes out. Again, the EM1X beats it, but not too shabby for a smartphone. But right after this, you turn a corner, you see things flying by, the vehicle is moving left, right, up, and down. You don't have any time to actually stop until you get here to Indy, hanging from the rope. The car is still moving up and down and back and forth, but you do have a split second to snap a shot. It's not awesome, but again, the EM1X does better because it can get us faster shutter speed, and so it doesn't get the motion blur that the iPhone has. This was the best image I got from the iPhone. Most of the images from the iPhone had a lot more blur. They looked something like this, very, very abstract. You could kind of tell what it was if you told someone this is from the Indiana Jones ride. They go, oh yeah, I kind of see it, but in general, it's just too much motion for that slow of a shutter speed. And then at the end here, this actually is another great example of what that slow shutter speed does. It made for a really nice abstract looking image with a 1/15 of a second shutter speed. It actually looks really cool. Not what I was expecting to get on this ride, but there you are. So yeah, 2 usable shots. One of them is extremely abstract. So if you're going to take the phone on Indiana Jones, just keep it in your pocket and enjoy the ride.
All right, well, that went about as well as I thought it was going to. So I think it's safe to say we've found the limit of what an iPhone can do in terms of photographing dark rides. So now I want to dial things back a little bit and try to find that sweet spot of lighting and speed conditions that it can deal with. So I think the best place to go next is Pirates of the Caribbean, because the speed is very slow, but the subjects are lit even better. So I think we might be able to get quite a few keepers over here on Pirates. So here's hoping.
So during this first part of the ride where you're cruising through the bayou, I didn't even bother trying to use the iPhone to take photos. It's actually a lot darker than it appears in this video. I was filming this on my EM1X, and it does an okay job of bringing out the subjects. The real shooting starts once you go down the second waterfall, and on the right-hand side you're going to come across these couple of skeletons, and this one leaning up against the rock with the sword in the chest and the seagull on the head is really well lit, and so it makes a great first subject, and as you can see, the iPhone is doing a pretty decent job. You're moving slow enough in the boat ride that 1/15 of a second shutter speed isn't really hurting you the way it did on Indiana Jones for sure, and on Haunted Mansion. So again, I think we found maybe the light level that works for this phone. The next scene you're going to come across is this helmsman type character, and this is all about timing, just holding the shutter button down, shooting in burst mode, and hoping to catch a shot during one of those flashes of lightning where the subject is lit up a lot better, just like we have here. And again, you have the EM1X on the right and the iPhone on the left, and the iPhone looks pretty clean. That ISO is down into a usable range, but we still have that slow shutter speed, but the strobe effect helps us out and saves us in this case. Then we come around a corner and we see another scene that I really love is these 2 skeletons playing chess. They're very close to the boat, especially if you're on the right hand side, and the iPhone again does a pretty decent job. Again, because the shutter is staying open longer on the iPhone than it is on the EM1X, it is drawing in a lot more of the background light. These images are lower contrast, and so you're going to want to maybe use some vignetting or do some post-production to draw the attention into the foreground where it belongs. This next scene, this long scene with the auction, I tried to test out the ability of the iPhone to shoot raw images. It'll actually shoot a digital negative format, which is a larger file format, and it gives you more elasticity in the file. It lets you reduce noise and sharpen, and this image cleaned up really, really well. I'm quite happy with how this came out. And then this scene near the end with the prisoners and the dog, the iPhone really knocked this one out of the park. It really lit up this scene. It's a wide enough angle, you can see the dog and you can see the characters, and there's enough light in the background that it really gave me a pretty clean image. Considering this was a 1/15 of a second and an ISO 8000, I'm amazed by how clean this image is. And this has not been tweaked with in Photoshop at all. That is straight out of the camera.
Okay, I consider that a success. I think we have found the sweet spot. The subjects on this ride are really, really well lit, and the ride vehicle moves slowly enough past them that you can get a lot of usable, keepable images, and not just okay for social media. Some of these images are really, really good. Like yesterday, I would not have believed you if you had told me that I could get images like this on Pirates of the Caribbean with an iPhone. I am honestly kind of blown away. I think if we're going to find any of the rides that are going to allow the iPhone to achieve the kind of results that people will say are truly equal to a DSLR or a real camera, we're probably going to find them on rides like the Jungle Cruise, because it's slow, there's a lot of natural light, so your ISO is not going to be jacked up into the stratosphere. You're going to be able to get also a faster shutter speed. And the iPhone, this iPhone, the newer one, has a telephoto lens, and so I can actually zoom in optically, not digitally, on some of the farther away scenes, so I can't wait to test that out and see how it works. Here we go. Okay, so as expected, once I gave it some natural light, things really cleaned up. I got a low ISO down in the triple digits, and I got a nice high shutter speed, and that telephoto lens, that 77mm equivalent telephoto lens, is really cool. It's way better than digital zoom. You can zoom in digitally beyond that. I don't recommend it. Stick with the optical zoom. But now that this camera has an optical telephoto lens, that opens up a lot of opportunities that I didn't have before. A lot of the reasons I would bring a real camera is because I couldn't zoom in and get decent shots from farther away. Now I have that option. So again, in the right conditions, I think there might be something to what people are saying, that there are certain situations where I can leave my big camera at home and just use my phone. I think that's pretty cool. There's one more ride type attraction that I want to take this camera on to see what it can do, and that is Big Thunder Mountain, because Big Thunder Mountain is outdoors in full sunlight. I want to see how high of a shutter speed this camera will give it, because I ride this ride specifically to photograph the dynamite goat that's at the top of the second lift hill. He goes by really, really fast. He's really close to the camera, so I'm hoping that the phone will actually choose a fast enough shutter speed so I can get some shots of him with no motion blur. So let's try it out. Okay, that was, I think that was a success. But even though I think I got a sharp enough image, there is a problem with it that I noticed when I was reviewing it, and it's that same problem you have with a lot of small sensor cameras, compact cameras, GoPros, phones, this Insta360 I'm filming on, and it's that the wider the angle of their lens, the more depth of field you have. That's just the way optics work. And so the goat was in focus, but so were the trees that were 50 feet behind him. And so that makes the image kind of confusing. It draws your attention away from the actual subject. So it's something that you can always tell something was shot on a mobile phone or a small sensor camera when you see that extreme amount of depth of field that's unintentional because of the design of the camera. But the last few generations of iPhone have included a feature to kind of minimize this on some still images. It's called portrait mode. And so I'm coming over to Galaxy's Edge to do a little bit of what I call character hunting, because Galaxy's Edge is the best place for character hunting. You have really detailed costumes, you have good light. I'm going to go try to find some characters and photograph them with the portrait mode, and then I'm going to compare that to using an actual portrait lens on the EM1X. My favorite one to shoot is Din Djarin with Baby Grogu, because the armor looks cool, the silver really pops against the background, there's a lot of fine detail. It is really challenging because it's a really busy area and there are a lot of people crowding around him trying to get the same photo you are, so I tend to stand back, use a longer lens, and try to wait for gaps between people to shoot. It's real challenging and requires a lot of timing. So I tried that with my 75mm on the EM1X, and then I used the 77mm portrait lens on the iPhone, and it works. It doesn't work great. You need to be a certain distance away from the subject. It tries to use some AI to detect what the subject is and then figure out what is not the subject, and so it blurs out the background, it blurs out the foreground. It's basically just applying a Gaussian blur. You could do this in Photoshop at home to any image. So is it necessary? No. Is it cool to see it happening in real time in front of you? Yeah, that's pretty cool. But if you don't have a real camera with a portrait lens, this gives you an option where you can get some of that subject and background separation. So, kind of cool. I want to also do some tests where I try to use this camera for some more wide-angle, static, kind of parkscape, landscape kind of work. But it is nowhere near dark enough for that yet. So I'm going to wander around, killing a little time. I'm going to find a few other features of the phone that I can talk to you about while we wait for it to get dark, to see how it does in the nighttime.
Well, since it was getting close to lunchtime, I decided to head over to California Adventure to try out the Magic Key Terrace. I actually enjoyed it there. I had some good food, I had some tasty drinks. It's a really nice, chill, relaxed area up above the hustle and bustle of California Adventure. I was able to use the macro mode on the wide-angle lens to capture some nice detailed shots of the cinnamon stick garnish on my cocktail. I'm sure a lot of people will be using this phone for this type of content creation, so it lets you get very, very, very close to the subject. And then I went over back to Disneyland and I shot this wide-angle low-light exposure inside Oga's Cantina. So phone does really good in low light if you can hold it still enough.
All right, so now that it's dark, I went and found a little spot over here near the Winnie the Pooh ride where there's a little a little waterfall. If you've never seen it, it's right next to the exit for the Winnie the Pooh ride. It's a great place for testing out long exposures. There's a fence there and a rock that you can brace your camera on. I set up the phone on a tripod where it couldn't move, and I let it select whatever it wanted to do. There's a little button in the corner you can toggle for night mode where it allows you to take a longer exposure. It wanted about a 4-second exposure, so I let it do that. And then I swapped it out with the EM1 and had it do the same thing. So now I can compare those side by side, and it looks pretty good. Again, when these sensors get enough light, they do a good job, and one way to get enough light to the sensor is leave the shutter open for a long time. So as long as nothing in your shot is moving, or if you want the things in your shot to blur, like I did with the water in this shot, you're good. So now that it's getting too dark to record, I better wrap this up. Overall, this was a really educational and kind of surprising day. Again, yesterday, if you'd have told me that I would get some of these images with an iPhone instead of a real camera, I wouldn't have believed you. So there are definitely some things it can do really, really well. So I guess first I can cover what I liked about the camera. It does have good image quality in general, as long as you know what you're doing, as long as you know that it needs light. But at normal focal lengths with a decent amount of light coming in, it's capable of some really, really good images. The other thing I love having a built-in optical telephoto lens and a built-in optical wide-angle lens. I think both of those make this a really well-rounded package that I can now use for all kinds of actual photography when I go out. And so there are a couple of situations where I might actually be able to leave my big camera at home and just make do with the iPhone. And I've never been able to confidently do that before. So there's a lot that this camera is really good at. The downsides are the same downsides as every small sensor camera. It's a small sensor that can't do very much. So when the light levels get low, it's going to first max out its ISO, and then it's going to start dragging the shutter and leaving it open longer to try to get that light that it wants to get you a balanced exposure. And the native camera app, at least, has no ability for the user to override what the camera wants to do. You can't tell it to use a certain shutter speed. You can't tell it to limit its ISO. You can't even really, if you're shooting in burst mode, you can't even really have any control over metering. Those aren't problems that are unique to this particular iPhone. Those are the problems that are unique to every small sensor camera that's designed to be small, compact, affordable, portable, and easy to use. When you get into tricky situations, it doesn't really know what to do. And if you as the user know how to solve the problem, you either have to figure out a way to trick it into doing the right thing, or just having to deal with a substandard result. I don't really need the hat anymore. There's no sun anymore. So we covered the good, we covered the bad. Now let's cover the ugly, to coin the popular phrase. First, it's an ergonomic nightmare to use. It doesn't really have a handle. You gotta kind of hold it in this weird claw grip, or hold it with two hands, or hold it in a way where you can't see half the screen. Half the time your fingers are getting in the way of the wide-angle lens on the back of the camera. It's just not comfortable to use. It's not very responsive. You don't have any tactile feedback like you do with a real shutter button. It doesn't behave like a real camera. The next thing is the lenses have no protection. They're out there and exposed on the back of the camera. Some cases put a little ridge around the lenses so that when you set it down on a surface, you're not going to scratch the lenses or get them dirty. But still, there's no lens hood at all. So if the sun is coming into the front of the lens, especially if those lenses are dirty or cracked or smudged, you're going to get flare, you're going to get softness, you're going to get low contrast, and it's going to ruin your images. The last thing is the battery life. If you're using this all day as a phone, you're on Instagram, you're on Facebook, you're taking photos, you're using Disney Plus, you're texting your friends, you're calling your friends, you're sharing your images, that's going to eat into your battery life, especially if you're shooting thousands of shots a day, the way I do when I come here and I'm really trying to get shots, especially on some of the attractions, some of the high speed stuff. It's going to burn through your battery life. I was down to 50% battery before noon shooting today. And so if you don't have a power bank, it's a logistical pain in the butt. So I guess that's my my overall verdict. This is really good. It's the best iPhone camera I've ever used. It's seriously good. There are some situations that I do feel confident leaving my big camera home, especially now that I have a wide-angle lens and a telephoto lens. If I'm just going out for a day, not intending to do any photography, but just in case I see something cool, now I've got a camera that I can confidently probably get a pretty decent image with. That is, for me, that's pretty high praise for a smartphone. I guess it's appropriate to record the last little bit from the actual phone. as I leave. Thanks for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it. Hope you found it educational. If you didn't find it educational, hopefully at least you found it entertaining. And I will see you in the next one. Thanks.